Here we are with Peter Dollins, writer, and your extensive library for this edition of Books Not Film, Part 2.
Right, okay, so I was talking about the books that were here and the books that were not here, and personal collections of some of these books. So I'll start off by talking about personal collection with some books that are not here, which I did have, and which have been loaned out by me, and which have not been returned, or which I've moved so much that have been lost in transit, so to speak, or sold off so I could come back from Greece to England, because I was stuck for money back in 84 in Greece. And so Norma Mailer, The American Dream, and his war book, where she made the breakthrough, was with, I forget the name of the book now. But anyway, when I was living on Sifnos, his ex-wife, Lady Jean Campbell, came to the island, and I met Lady Jean Campbell, as she titles herself, Jean Campbell, through Rhonda, who was this very eccentric woman, Amazon in the sense of being very big and very strong, about 6'3", and she did labouring work with the local builders in Vassy, and they used to say, "Oh, Rhonda, lift up that concrete bag, show people you can do it." And she would do this concrete bag, they all stare at Rhonda, these big muscles, And Rhonda met Jean. Jean came up on the ferry, and Rhonda was on the same ferry. She overheard her, and then somehow she introduced her. And then also Yulia, my ex, this very famous painter in America, also in Greece, also somehow. I do not know if Jean knew Yulia before, if they were introduced on the island. I'm not quite sure. But I met Jean Campbell. And in American Dream, the person who is characterized in that book is Jean Campbell, and Norma Mailer married Jean Campbell. And so we became kind of friends, and I showed her around the island, as I've been living on the island for a long time, and I could translate for her, as I knew reasonably good Greek. I mean, at least on an island level, and at a peasant level, you could say. And so we became quite good friends, and she was telling me about her father. She's the granddaughter of Lord Beaverbrook. She was telling me her father was a friend of Joe Kennedy, who was the ambassador to the UK, and he was pro-fascist, and he was in contact with the German fascist organisation, and phoning them in England and into Germany. And Jean criticised her father and said, "Oh, this man is terrible. You shouldn't have anything to do with him," and blah blah blah. And her father said, "Oh, he's okay." At the same time, he was recording all the telephone calls he was making, and he was sending them to Roosevelt. And Roosevelt sent a postcard to Joe saying, "Come back to Boston, Joe. The girls are prettier in Boston, Joe. Come back." So he got in the sack. His father got in the sack. And then she was saying about Norman that, Jean was like the figure of the Anglo-Saxon princess. I mean, she came from this very rich background, a very titled background, very influential and connected background. And Norman was this Jewish lad from New York who made it on his own intelligence, wit, and the true genius. I mean, you don't know how else you can describe it. And he married her. But then she said it was like he'd taken the Anglo-Saxon princess prisoner and wouldn't let her go. He had her there as a prisoner. So in the end, it didn't work out between them, obviously. And Jean was on the island with think her name was Kuzi. I think I got the right name, Kuzi. I'd confused her with another young girl. And she was not the daughter of Norman, she was the daughter of the best friend of Che Guevara. At that time, she was an incredibly beautiful girl. And later on, she got a part in a soap opera in America. And a friend of mine who had a house on the island, who was an artist who knew them all in New York, was saying it's the worst possible thing that could happen to her because she was surrounded by all these incredibly shallow people. I'm not saying all hairdressers and makeup people are shallow, but she's exposed to this incredibly shallow level of evaluation, you know. And later, as she grew up, she became really a big girl, so she can no longer do this kind of stuff, you know, because I think her father was maybe quite big, you know. And Jean had really broad shoulders, you know. She was stocky, but, you know, she had broad shoulders kind of girl. And she was also saying about Norman that he thought if he slept with a woman, he had to try to give her a baby. It was his duty. So he ended up with about 20 of these children. You know, he had to work like crazy, writing stuff all the time. So this is the reason for a lot of his latest work being not that great. He was writing for money. And later on, the daughter of Norm Mailer and Jean came to the island, and she was doing an acting course, and she was a brilliant mimic. She was so funny. I do not know if she went on to become a great actress or if she dropped out and did something else. I don't know, because she was relatively young at the time. I mean, not much more than 18, 19, 17, I'm not quite sure of the age. But I met her when she came across, you know. And I was staying with Jean because I woke up from Vathie. Vathie is a small place. At that time, it was an isolated bay. They now run a road in there, but it was an isolated bay. You know, I got in there by boat, small boat, or you walked across the mountains. About a 3-hour walk across the mountains. So every week I would walk out to get supplies that I didn't have, you know, in terms of food, you know. And so that's my personal connection with Norman Mailer, who I never met, but through Lady Jean Campbell, as she describes herself. She is a very bright, very perceptive woman, I gotta say. You know, title or not, she was a perceptive lady. There's a lot of books here. I mean, I don't know.
The first one that comes to your fingers, maybe.
I don't know. But I find so many modern writers, I mean, they can't write in the sense like Philip K. Dick is a great visionary, and I love his work, but in terms of putting together sentences and paragraphs, he can't write. He literally can't write. He can't do it. And what saves him is his vision, maybe his madness. He can relate his madness. He can relate the madness of himself in America, and he can combine them, like the story that they dramatized on the radio, Dangerous Visions the other day on the radio for. And another book I don't have, Ray Bradbury. I don't have any personal connection with Ray Bradbury and the Martian Chronicles, but I loved it as a teenager. I never lost my feeling, obviously, for the great, for the writers, you know, the classics, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Chekhov, all those guys. And H.G. Wells. And, also, I picked up Eric Ambler the other day. He writes these thriller and spy kind of books, and I was amazed how good his writing was. What I discovered was that because they republished 3 of his books. Journey into Fear, which I first discovered because they serialized it on Radio 4 Extra. That was Journey into Fear, and that's set just before the Second World War, just as it's beginning. And this engineer is traveling to Turkey, and Turkey is a potential ally, and he's not in any way a spy, or he's not in any way equipped, but he's just pushed into this position. And they made a film for it with Orson Welles. The Mask of Demetrius, and Epitaph for a Spy. Those 3 books they republished are really great books. I tried his other books and they're really not as good. But I would recommend those 3 books. It's surprisingly good writing. In every sense, characterization, writing skills, leading to the imagination, what should be left to the imagination, tension, and the way he draws in the political background and embeds it in the story and the characters is also not many writers can do all those things. And I think when the war came on, I think he became a journalist, full-time journalist, and worked for the BBC. And I think after the war, I don't think he ever really captured the height of his powers, which I think was at that period. And maybe it's actually suited his writing with the extreme right coming up and people being victimized, and and the left being victimized. And I think that really suited his talents best in his writings. So again, I won't say he's a great writer, but I think he's a very, very fine writer in his best work. And right now they've just been serializing Side with Rosie, which I have here, which is a book by what's his face?
What's the name of the book again?
Cider with Rosie.
Cider with Rosie, yes.
By Laurie Lee.
Laurie Lee, yeah.
Laurie Lee. Mm. And they just serialized the other book of the week. The other day was As I Walked Out One Midsummer's Morning, which is about him going out. He played the violin, and he went to Spain and walked through Spain, getting enough money and food and bread, etc., by playing the violin. The Spanish really loved music, even though it was a very poor place, and at least could at least get food, etc. I don't have that particular book. I have quite a lot of his books. I don't have that particular book. I'll probably get hold of it and reread it. I might have read it a long time ago. Cider with Rosie is a terrific book. When I was young, I lived in the same area down in that part of the West Country, which is around Cirencester area. We were in not very far from his village where he comes from.
What time is it set?
Cider with Rosie, that's set before the Second World War. When he goes to Spain one morning, just the first dawn, just the first threatenings, and the Spanish Civil War breaks out at that time, and his autobiography is set back before that, so he's growing up before that. So that's set back in, I guess, the 20s, end of the 20s, up until the 30s. I think it ends fairly early when he's still around 15, 16, 17, I believe. If I remember correctly, it's a long time since I read it. 30 years, 40 years since I read it.
Yeah, just listening to the radio dramatisation this morning, it seemed a really harsh sort of upbringing or childhood. He was talking about the children dying very young.
Yeah. Well, I think back in that time, children, diphtheria was quite common, and the child rate of death was quite high, as it probably is in the third, what we used to call the third world, was poor world, undeveloped world, poor world, whatever you want to call it nowadays. My dad, often telling me how children died up and down the road from diphtheria, pneumonia, tuberculosis, various other complaints. Accidents which they didn't get good enough treatment for. So the funeral, the wagon taking people away, children away who were dead was quite common just up and down this single road. So it was not uncommon for the time. And his mother, I think, was either a widow or had been deserted by her husband. I don't remember again exactly which. It's 40 years ago I read the book. And, it was a agricultural community, and life was hard in an agricultural community. I mean, when my father was working, went to being a gardener after he left the railways. I mean, it was a hard life. But Dad, when he's trying to make it on go himself, he would get up 6 o'clock in the morning, wouldn't come back till 10 o'clock at night. Be right there working, and sometimes day after day after day. And people could do it then because they'd been brought up to that life, started helping their father when they were children, become accustomed to it. Nowadays people are no longer accustomed to that kind of work, and they eat rubbish foods. Because there was a story the other day, my friend Gary was telling me about this documentary. They were bringing people over from Hungary to do the fruit picking. And these people in Liverpool could no longer stand being on dole, and they tried it. And they couldn't do it. They actually physically couldn't do it. And I remember fruit picking as a child. I mean, as an older child, 13, 14. Almost a turning teenager, you could say. Some of the children came from school for me because they wanted a bit of spare money, and they found it very difficult. I was used to doing it, so for me, I'd already got used to that entire thing. So the guy was quite pleased with me, but the farmer, he wouldn't keep the other children on. They couldn't do it. So now you're living in a city, you're eating all this rubbish food, you're not keeping fit, or you're not fit. You go to this kind of work, and then maybe you're 40, 50 years old. Do that kind of work now, you need probably 4 or 5 months to your body to acclimatize. 20, you can acclimatize within 6 to 8 weeks. A teenager. But you're going to have to stop drinking at night. You're going to have to go to bed at a reasonable time. You have to eat okay for that time. And then it's going to take you 6 weeks to acclimatize. But which time your farmers sack you. Say, you can't keep up, man.
I'm drawn towards Thomas Hardy behind you, which was also talking about the kind of hard times that people were living in.
Okay, I'll just finish off with a personal connection with Rosie Lee. Not Rosie Lee, Laurie Lee Rhodes, siding with Rosie. Because when I was in Athens, I met this Irish teacher, English teacher, because I was teaching English in Athens. Well, I was also working on a Greek insurance magazine doing the section. But he got to know Laurie Lee, and he really criticised him for his writing. He was saying his writing was rubbish, etc. And Laurie Lee was saying, I don't understand why you're becoming so aggressive. I had to reread Rosie, Rosie, because I don't understand it. I don't remember it as being badly written. Certainly, it's very vivid. Very storyboard. Okay, so it's Thomas Hardy. Well, I read Jude the Obscure when I was about 16, maybe younger. And I was working on the railways, and my depot became Didcot, so I was working across to Oxford, which is only 18 miles away. And Jude the Obscure is this man who does educate himself, but then he discovers that it's just impossible for him to do anything with his education. Like, he gets to speak Latin, knows Latin, etc. And he goes up to Oxford and tries to speak to these professors, and it's just hopeless, And that book terrified me. And it terrified me so much that I didn't read another Thomas Hardy book for 30, 40 years now. I read Tess of the Reveals next, I think. And I think I already said I have an indirect personal connection with Thomas Hardy because Robert Grace, in his autobiography, he and his wife, they bicycle down to see Thomas Hardy, and they get along very well, and they talk about poetry and these things. And Thomas Hardy tells him to always carry a notebook and pen with him because he went out to do some gardening. He had the idea for a book or a long short story, I forget which now. It was the best one he ever had. And he thought, I'll just finish pruning these tomatoes and I'll come back in. He came back and he'd forgotten it all. So you often wonder what he was, and he just couldn't remember. So they always carry a pen and notebook with you. So, and I found Thomas Hardy a great writer, but I find it a little bit grim for me. You know, I'm sure it's a very realistic picture of the time of working people. And of course, after he drew The Obscure, he had so much criticism from the critics that he stopped writing prose. He wrote poetry. I love his poetry, Thomas Hardy poetry. I still find it a little bit difficult to read his prose because it's realistic, it's great, but it's grim. You know what I mean? And he seems to have, or at least his characters seem to have this vision of a god, of there being a god, but being like an Old Testament God who just strikes you down, boom. So you just cannot win. You know, you're just gonna end in suffering and pain. Like when Jude the Obscure's child hangs himself and hangs all his siblings because he overhears Jude talking about how difficult it is to look after the children and feed them, etc. And he hangs himself, and I think he hangs his siblings as well. I think that's in Jude the Obscure. Don't think it's in Tessa. But Tessa the Herbivorous has very realistic descriptions of picking beet, because agriculture work was just so tough. And picking beet, I think it's done mechanically now, but even when I was a young man, they were still picking beet physically. I mean, picking soft fruit is nothing compared to that. It just tears you. God, it's such a hard job, you know. No, I worked on the roads as a fireman, steam engine, fireman's, you know, you're moving tons of coal every day. And even that is just nowhere near as hard as picking beet, you know. And Tessa the Herbivorous is doing that, you know. It's a very realistic picture of agricultural work. I mean, obviously the guy knew what he was talking about. I think he grew up in Dorset. I think he came from a country background. And he became an architect, didn't he? Yeah, he became an architect. I think one of the women he married was quite religious, and she also rejected his work, I think, when it became showing these dark sides of how life was at that time. So let me see what's this one. Few eggs and no oranges, the diaries of Vera Hodgson, 1940-45. This woman lived through the Blitz, and she kept a diary. And it really is quite interesting.
What's her name?
She's Vera, V-E-R-E, Hodgson, Hodgson. It's published by Persephone Books, which is actually just around the corner on Lambscondia Street. It's on my daily walk almost. I went in there and asked them if they had anything else, and they said they let anything else continuing from that, because I was trying to find things which covered the same period as my mother's life. And they said the diary does continue, but I have to go down to the library, I think in Kensington, and ask to see the libraries, because they're not published after 45. They're not published to continue, but they're not published. Well, this is quite a vivid picture of what it was like to be living through the Blitz in London, you know, from 1940-45. And if anybody's interested in that period and interested in a woman's experience and Blitz, I would recommend this book. Yes. And I also have some copies of Steinbeck here. I've got the log of the Sea of Cortez here somewhere. By Steinbeck. And that's just where he has this famous character. Where is it? It's here somewhere. He has this famous character, Doc, who he puts in Cannery Row a book which I loved. Cannery Row. And there's a great character there called Doc, who's based upon this man he knew and was a doctor in the area. It shows all the life of these bums, people just surviving, rejecting consumer society before it even came into existence, because this is back in the Great Depression in England. So I recommend Cannery Row. It's not his greatest book, but his greatest book is Grapes of Wrath, of course. But it's a nice introduction to his work. But then he went on this trip with the Doc of the fictional Doc, who's actually a factual character. He went down to the Sea of Cortez, and they took his trip on this boat, fishing and exploring. So it's a wonderful little book. Maybe I've lent it to Peter later. I'm not quite sure now. And it's not a great book, but as a relaxation, I would really recommend that book. And of course, if you want to read his greatest books, it's Grapes of Wrath. And I really like Indubious Battle, which seems to be almost repressed now. In Indubious Battle, there's an acknowledgement and a kind of indirect praise for Jack London, one of the union organisers there, who's trying to hold people together in the Great Depression when people are really, living in these huge hobo camps. And they're not hobos; they're just people trying to find work. They've been driven off their land. Hundreds and thousands of people living in these rags they put together to keep the rain off, etc. And it's a organizer there is called London, and he paints this profile of him, And I think that's an indirect praise to Jack London. And of course, all those writers owe a great debt to Jack London. You could say Steinbeck's a greater writer than Jack London, but he was a great inspiration and influence for Steinbeck and Hemingway and all those guys. That was a period I went through when I read all those books, and I obviously his best books are still great. I would still reread them if I'm in that particular mood to reread those books.
Who's Amy Tan? There's a couple of books there.
Yes, Amy Tan is. I'm not quite sure. She's a great writer. She's a very, very good writer. She's a Chinese American. And I picked up her book, and she paints this life of a Chinese young girl in California growing up. And she has this crazy sister who's really half mad, who comes from China, or a relation of some kind, who comes and stays with her. And then this sister drives her half mad, and she has all these kind of psychic inspirations and all these theories, and she's always talking, and she just, drives this poor young girl completely out of her mind. Or she feels, and she has a very difficult relationship with her mother, Amy, the girl in the thing. I think this is based autobiographical. I think this is based upon.
I thought we unplugged the phone. We should call it Books Unplugged. Normal service will be resumed as soon as possible.
Where were we?
You were talking about Amy Tan.
Amy Tan, that's right. Yeah, I really enjoyed her books. And then in that particular book, she goes back to China with this sister, who, and there are probably things in her writing which are flaws and all that kind of stuff. But I really enjoy her writing. But then her writing suddenly becomes quite weak, and she's physically stricken down. She suddenly has no energy. She's so exhausted she has to go to bed, and she can't find out what it is. And after a long time, she finds another sufferer, I think, maybe from the internet. It's this thing whereby the deer ticks bore in, and he gets this disease which comes from deer ticks.
Is that Lyme disease?
Lyme disease. And this is before it was well known about it. So for a long time she suffered from that, and after that she tries to continue writing it. It's never as strong after that. Which is very, very understandable. The poor woman is struck down. Right? But I really enjoyed seeing that perspective from within the Chinese community, from a young girl trying to deal with her home community. They made the Joy Luck Club film from her book, I think.
What was the name of the film?
The Joy Luck Club, is it? Mm. They made that from one of her books. And so she I think she used to love her dog and take her dog for walks, and I'm not sure if she's suspicious or it's just my suspicion that taking her dog for these walks, she got picked up this deer tick, of course, I'm no longer shooting so many deer in the States, and so there's more of these ticks around. Lyme disease is more prevalent, that's the way nature works. Kind of, we forget it as at our peril, so to speak. And
okay, I'm going to totally distract you, and I'm probably going to grimace, but you have a collection of Murakami books.
Yeah, I fell in love with Murakami. I didn't read Murakami for a long time because I confused him with another Japanese writer who I tried to read on the island. Has a very similar name, and he ended up this fellow ended up committing harakiri. He was a very right-wing character, and I really despised and hated his writing. I tried it, but I couldn't read it. And he has quite a similar name to Murakami, and so I ignored Murakami for a long time. When I was in Thailand, there was a book by Murakami, and I thought, okay, so I'll try this guy again. But it was not the same guy, and it's just and I think I began with Kafka on the Shore, which is a terrific book. Again, I recommend anybody to read Kafka on the Shore by Murakami.
Look, what is it about?
It's this young boy. He has this huge orbital conflict with his father. Is his father a university professor? And he tries to break away. And he feels greater and greater pressure. And he just gets on this bus and he has these very strange dreams, and he just gets on this bus and gets out, goes away, and then it's a journey of it's a story of his voyage on the bus. He meets this young woman, and they have this connection, and he ends up finding this job in this library, working for this woman running this library in another part of Japan. But somehow there's a connection with his own life in this library, in the woman in the library, in the painting. The painting is called Kafka on the Shore. And he thinks he might have killed somebody. He has this very strange dream, but he's not sure if he's killed somebody or not, and he feels he's not out of his father's influence. And in a way, he's trying to track down his father, and he goes into this. He hears about this place in the woods, and he goes and lives in this cabin. And by walking from the cabin away into this very mysterious place, he comes into a place which is like another dimension, and he can meet his mother who is dead, or at least a dream of his mother who is dead. And he learns about he has hints about how his father is trying to take great power through what he's doing. And he comes back to the world, comes back, and I think he sleeps with this woman he does sleep with this woman who's running the library, and she tells him about the story of the behind the Kafka on the Shore painting. I think it might have a connection with Spar, I'm not really sure now. And then he comes back, and also at the same time you meet this talking cat. This cat that talks to people. It's a magical cat, you know. And this kid, he hitchhikes back across Japan, and then he comes into this direct conflict with his father, which, you know, and he manages to move into this other dimension to defeat his father, you know. And it's a terrific book, and it all works. It sounds peculiar and strange, but it works. He makes it work, you know. I lent it to my Israeli Jessica friend, and she loved it. And so then I began reading his books, you know. But it's all this inner outer exploration stuff, and it's, you know, it's really, it's like another dimension experience sometimes, and it's all these complex things that. I read about 9 times books. I thought, that's enough. I don't want any more. I mean, thank you very much, but I recommend Kafka on the Shore. And The Go Away Bird. I mean, that Go Away Bird is a really great book too. I got kind of fed up in the end. I think he was in Norwegian Wood, I think, is the first book, and I really don't think very much Norwegian Wood. I tried reading it. I thought, it's really... I think it really got going with Kafka on the Shore, you know. And he's very big. I mean, Jessica's read him in Chinese. He's big in China. Jessica's read him in Chinese. It's a Chinese translation. So she knew about Murakami.
Do you know anything about his life?
I think he was a jazz musician. He loved jazz. He was running this nightclub. He got married, had a child, I think. He's a long distance runner. He's written about his long distance running, how it helps him ride, discipline of it and everything else. And I don't know much else about his stuff apart from that. No, his books are terrific and completely different from this other guy who had a similar name, who committed harakiri in the end and wanted to bring back, you know, this extreme right wing. He was part of this extreme right wing group.
You're not talking about Mishima.
Mishima, terrible.
That was a different time, though, wasn't it?
Different time. I just confused.
Much more modern.
Yeah, I just confused the two names.
Confusion
of the names.
Okay. Just for the record.
I just confused the names.
And hop, skipping and jumping to Kafka then. Was Kafka an influence on your...
Yeah, I really like Kafka. I mean, what's the great influence on me? On the trial? I found that... No, I mean, Trial's a great book. Okay. I found The Castle more inspiring and interesting. I mean, the Trial is a bit downbeat, but, you know, that's, his reality was such that, you know, that was fair enough. But I've been told I had a friend who loved Kafka and knew all about him. What he was saying was that he considered his books to be comedy, satire comedy. And his friends would come around and he would read this, you know, the famous story about the guy who turns into the beetle.
Metamorphosis. Yeah.
His friends would come around and read him, and they'd be all rolling around laughing hysterically. It was satire comedy as far as he was concerned. This is what my friend was saying, who loved him and got to know about his life. And I never got into him to that degree. In this terrifying short story about this guy who sets up this torture execution machine, and is so precise he has to test it on himself. You know, it's a terrifying story. As an exposure of certain aspects of colonialism, you can argue that's great insight. But as I said, I mean, he'd come around, he was read these stories to his friends, and they all get hysterical, rolling around in laughter. Satire comedy was considered. I don't know if they consider that true of the trial or not, but things like Metamorphosis, I think. And I could see Metamorphosis in that light. I like Kafka. I can't say he was a huge influence or tremendously important to me. He is important. I mean, he's a great important writer. I mean, he is important. But when I was in Prague, I walked up to the castle, and I went into the reconstructed cafe, which had been reconstructed around where he used to go into the cafe. I wrote there, and Prague is wonderful. It has all these huge cafes where you can go in, have a coffee, and write all day, and not be bothered. So it's great for this. I can see it. It must have been great as a cafe intellectual society, and you can really see. And of course, you go up there. Of course, most of the Jewish people, of course, were killed, and they have this place up in the castle where they preserved this street which was full of Jewish people, very, very small buildings where people lived. But all the people there have been killed, of course. They preserve it as a kind of memorial. I guess some people live, but most would have died. And I really loved Prague. It wasn't too expensive at that time. That's back in 2003. I mean, I had a terrible trauma there, but that's a separate kind of thing.
Was that a tooth trauma?
No, it wasn't tooth.
Ah.
I went there to meet a woman called Dinara. Dinara had been a pen friend I'd had in a long time ago, after the breakdown of the Soviet Union. She wrote to me from close to Moscow. Was it St. Petersburg or Moscow? I think close to St. Petersburg, maybe. And she had a sister. She was studying literature. She wanted a pen friend, and I was writing to her. She was very young at that time when I was first writing to her. Her English was kind of limited. I got a little bit bored and kind of ceased writing to her. And then suddenly, many years later, I got this panic-stricken letter. She'd gone back with her family to Kazakhstan, where they'd originally come from, to Almaty. And her sister, who was a composer and musician, still studying, she had written pieces of music, which she sent copies of to me, had been kidnapped for money, had been held for money. She was appealing for help. And I wrote around to everybody I could think of. Baroness Nicholson did her very, very best and talked to the foreign minister for Kazakhstan. A few people were sympathetic. Doris Lessing sent me a couple £100, which I sent on to the family. I sent her proof of the money I sent on, because I had a correspondence with Doris Lessing from before. I'd written to her before. And Dinara phoned me up and said, "Oh, I'm coming to Prague, I want you to meet me there." And I said, "Well, I'm not prepared or anything." She said, "I already booked a ticket," so she panicked me into... Anyway, I made the decision to go and meet her in Prague. So I flew out, and then I had to wait all night at the airport. She was late in the morning, so, The police came around with their submachine guns, and they said, oh, you can't lie down and sleep here. I said, I'm going to sleep here unless you... I said, oh... I walked away. I was just in a very bad mood by that time, I forget exactly what I said. But I really, they would have to force me with bullets to move. I was just that terrible at that time, I just, sometimes you come, I'm not going to be any more diplomatic. No more diplomacy. Kill me or do it. And anyway, she came in the morning. We went back to the hostel, booked a room for the two of us. Then she wanted to marry me. I thought we'd come out to talk about her sister. I found it very difficult to get her to talk about her sister. She seemed very reluctant to do so. And so I refused. Also, I was trying to explain to her that by that time it would have been so difficult to get her a visa. I couldn't just marry her and get her a visa. Even a real marriage, which she wanted, and going to England would have been very difficult. Now I realise at the time could have done it. I didn't think at the time we could because I'd already signed up to such a degree. I could have gone to Kazakhstan, married her there, and then brought her back to England. It would have been very, very difficult. We might have got away with it. might have managed it. Not got away, might have managed it. But she wasn't talking to me. We weren't getting along on any kind of level. And eventually she said, we'll just have an affair. She was a very, very attractive girl, and I said, no, I don't think it's a good idea, and blah, 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 blah. And I gave in. And after we immediately slept together, she said, oh, now you have to marry me. And we were going around Prague. I was trying to find a way for her to stay in Prague to find work there. I was saying, they're going to join this European Union. This is a way for you to becoming a European citizen. And find a cheap place to rent and work. And I came back late one night. She said, where you been? I said, well, don't panic, kind of. And then the next day she disappeared. And she didn't come back all night. She didn't come back until the next night. I had gone to report to the police, the missing person. And she met these people from Belarus, these people running an art gallery, who she might have met when we were going around looking at the art galleries from the point of possibility of showing her work, because she was an artist. And she came up with all these strange ideas I've been giving her. Money doesn't matter, it's in the mind, and all these things. And I said, I don't have any money, I just... what you're saying is just not practical. And she wouldn't discuss it. She was not at all contrite. And when the hostel guy said, where have you been? She said, just out. She wouldn't. So it's just, even the people in the hostel found it very strange also, her behaviour. And we weren't getting along. I mean, if we'd been really getting along well, if she'd been talking to me, she wasn't talking to me. I had been married. You don't talk to somebody, and you come back and you're living in this very small place where somebody won't talk to you. I couldn't see how it would possibly work.
Did you ever write about the story?
I did write a television play about it, a film play about it. But in the end, I didn't edit it down enough, and I put it to one side. David liked... Well, I went to Berlin after that to talk to David about this situation, and he was in a terrible mess at the time, so it wasn't a good time to go and see him about it. And all kinds of problems there. If I should go back and marry her and these things, and if he thought everything she said was true and so on and forth, so on. So in the end, I called the bus coach back to the thing, and she seemed to have this really strong connection with these Belarusian artists. So in the end, I thought, well, they can look after her, and she went back from Kazakhstan to there, from there. She wanted to become a European citizen, and it was like a big mistake on her part, because it happened as I said it would happen. Czech Republic, as it then became later on, joined the EU, and she would have been in a good position to have claimed European citizenship and Czech citizenship, and then use that as a European thing. And I considered it for some time. I thought, when I got back, I thought, well, I guess I was coming back yet. David was inspired by this to write his own story, which was actually put on the radio about this woman being kidnapped. He cut out the part around Dinara because I objected to some degree that he just lifted that without kind of seeking proper permission or with regard to me or anything else. Well, rather than talk about anything, typical David, he just cut that part out. So, but anyway, he used the idea of a woman being kidnapped, and because obviously it's common reality throughout the Soviet Union, throughout poor countries, that women are being kidnapped, trafficked, and used as sex slaves or manual slaves, whatever. And this girl's sister has never reappeared. I mean, I presume she must be dead now. And Dinara appeared to believe it was Chechen people she'd got to know, where she was studying music. Whether that was so or not, I don't know. But she hated the Chechens because of this. And later on, I thought about, later on I thought, well, I just can't leave this. I better offer her a marriage. I wrote to her and went to a lawyer here and tried to get him to. I got him on the case through legal aid, and then she wasn't cooperating with us. And I said, well, I'll come out there and see you, and she said no. And next thing I knew, she had a child with somebody else, so, kind of that was that. And then she phoned me many years later, about 2 or 3 years ago, because then she was living alone looking after a child, and she was talking about reconnecting with me, and I said, well, all my attention and funds are now tied up with a Chinese woman friend who... a painter who, I didn't say this, but he's really genuine and a really terrific painter. And as Peter Slater said, she would make a great cartoonist doing illustrations, but she wasn't that good a painter. I didn't say that part of it. And then she got very angry with me. She wrote an email saying, I never want to see you again, I never want to remember you again, and blah, blah, blah. So I haven't heard nothing since that point. And he said, oh, she'll be back in contact with you, don't worry. I'm not worried, but But I feel bad about the whole thing because I didn't manage it very well. Obviously I should not have allowed myself to have been pressurised into flying out to see her at that time. That was a big mistake.
So to summarise, do you think books influence life, or life influences books?
Yeah, it's a two-way street, I think, But certainly books influence life, and I guess books come from the caves. And when we sat around the fires telling stories, people would sum up their day, and then they would sum up their week and their month and their year and their life, and stories and myths. And implanted in the stories and myths would be, in the end, would become wisdom, and then would become a way of looking at things. And that gets transferred into poetry. I mean, even today in Greece, when I was there, you have this poetic forum where you have 5 or 6 or 7 guys. It's always guys at that time, always men at that time. You have this forum where somebody makes up 2 lines of a poem, somebody else makes up the next 2 lines until it goes around in a circle like that, bang. And that was still continuing at that day. So, you could say books are a continuation of this. When printing first came in, they said, oh, it was to destroy memory, etc., which people poo-poo. But the people on the island where I live, most of the people, older people there, were literate. And their memories were much, much better than literate people. 100 times better. Easily. You can say it's a necessity, and you can say maybe all that information which comes in. I mean, and also people are reading newspapers, which have mostly a lot of rubbish as well. And maybe all that information just kind of dampens the memory, or maybe the people don't have to use memory about it, But all that wisdom then goes into books, into plays. I guess plays were maybe one of the first things, although the Epic of Gilgamesh is really, really old. That's ancient, before plays maybe. And the Iliad, Homer, which is still, it's still a great book. I mean, a friend of mine rereads the Homer, the Odyssey, and the Iliad every year. That's Carl Gottesman, good poet friend of mine. And so all these things go into books. So definitely books influence life, but at the same time, there is. I think it's a continual interchange. But probably people are influenced by their entire culture, entire possibilities, things they learn from books. And, I read, I can't remember particular stories at the moment, but people have been in survival situations where they remembered things in books and tried it, and it saved their life, so this also, this can work, I wouldn't like to say which is more important, but I think the world would be better if everybody was literate on the higher level of getting to love books. There's no point pushing people to read Shakespeare or to have Shakespeare plays. Very often this comes too early, before people are emotionally have the experience or knowledge or to receive that, so they put people off books, in fact, schools, I mean, the whole thing about set books is a mistake, so they should put aside a period for children to read what they love and say, well, you might try this book, you might try this book, if they like it and love it, great. If they don't, they don't. So it becomes self-directed, because then when the motivation comes from yourself, then you're going to continue to read, as I did and as many, many people do.
So Peter Dollins, writer,
yeah,
from London.
Yeah,
this was Books Not Film, Part 2. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.